Welcome once again to the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast. He is the Legendino Tim Vickery in Rio de Janeiro.
And he is the king of nighttime radio, who can also do daytime, Dotun and Tim.
Yeah, there is a time difference between us, Tim. What is it? Is it 4 hours?
Yeah, it's 4 hours. 4 hours. If you could tell Sky TV that, I'd really appreciate it.
Oh, I'll do my best. So
WhatsApp messages coming through at 4:20 in the morning over the last few weeks have been greatly appreciated.
Why are you complaining? You're in Brazil, mate.
Well, I'm not complaining actually, because as Frank Bruno said all those years ago, Rudolph pays good corn. So if they want to wake me up at 4:20 in the morning, that's fine by me.
Did he really say that?
Yeah, he said it. Yeah. I used one of his in the week as well. And, it's funny when you're on air and live, the things that just pop into your head. Because I was talking about Cavani being bought by Man United, and I was saying, he's got 50 goals.
We lost you, Tim. Sorry, we lost you for a moment. You said when you're on air live.
Yeah, when you're on air live, it's funny the things that just pop into your head. Sometimes I don't know how you filter these things out, because you're on the air live for so many hours. But I was doing a thing about Cavani joining Man United, and I was saying, he's got 50 goals for Uruguay, 50 goals. And then a little Frank Bruno popped in, and I said, I heard myself saying, they don't give those away in a sweetie shop, which Frank used to say all the time. And I haven't heard that for like 30 years. And then suddenly that's what was coming out. So thanks, Frank.
I'm not the only person laughing at that, because we've got a special guest on this edition of the podcast, the one and only Darren Lewis of the Daily Mirror. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have joined two legends of broadcasting, first of all, and of the game as well.
But what about of the print media, mate? How long have you been doing that job?
Oh, goodness me. Actually, I was talking to someone very recently about it. I've been a journalist now for 25 years. And it's really weird. It's very true when someone says, if you enjoy what you do, then you'll never do a day's work in your life. If you were to ask my boss, he would just agree with the latter bit, but not the former bit. But no, it has been a fantastic, 2 decades and a half. First in local newspapers, then in regional, and now in national newspapers. Really enjoyed it.
Tim, I'm sure you've got a lot to ask, but if I could just throw one in very quickly. I always wonder with top-notch, or as we say, a toponoris journalist like yourself, Big Boucher and all of that, I always wonder, when you've interviewed so many great sports people, which is the one, which is the interview that resonates still?
It's really weird, because there are lots of sportsmen who are magnificent on the field, but off the field they're quite reticent. They're not as charismatic. They're quite softly spoken. Sometimes they're quite abrupt. But I must tell you, out of all of the people that I've ever interviewed, or been part of an interview, weirdly, I remember being in the England camp in the Germany World Cup in 1996. Goodness me, what a faux pas that was. And Gary Neville was brought up to be interviewed. And normally when players are sitting in front of the media and there's sort of 30, 40 dictaphones in front of them, and lots of the certainly more experienced than I was at the time. Sorry, I said 96, didn't I? And that clearly meant 2006, so do forgive me for that. But all of the more experienced journalists, the chief football writers, the chief sports writers, are all gathered round. And I'd been at the Daily Mirror for about 6 years by then. And he'd come out to speak, and the microphones were in front of him, and he was articulate, he was inspirational, he was rousing. By the time he finished, I thought I wanted to play for England. He was that inspirational, and that takes some doing. And so I would say, of all the people, I've done Champions Leagues, I've done World Cups, clearly I've done domestic games as well. But I have to say that straight away, when you ask me that question, he certainly does come to mind. It's no surprise that he's gone into being a very accomplished broadcaster after finishing his playing career.
Tim?
Well, the obvious question coming off the back of that is if England World Cup 2006, if the speech was so inspirational, why was the football so shit? But we'll move on. What aspect of what you do gives you most pleasure? What do you most love doing? When does it even less feel like doing a day's work?
Actually, the writing, particularly now. But it always has been the case, because the one thing they allow me to do at the Daily Mirror is express myself, to say what I think. So you don't have to follow the template that everyone else follows. You don't have to agree with your colleagues. You can have your own opinion, and sometimes that opinion might upset a few people, but that's what red top tabloid journal, that's what any kind of journalism should be. It should be about your honestly held beliefs. I watched you very recently, this week actually, Tim, and you were talking, I think it was about Pelistri, who signed for Manchester United, and I remember you saying that you felt perhaps he'd gone there too soon. It may have been Traore or Pelistri. Was it Pelistri?
That's it, yeah. That's it, correct.
I remember you saying you felt he'd gone there too soon, and when I listen to you, I always learn something, and whether it's a factual piece of information or just about how to not go with the flow, because there's been a lot of excitement about the young boy. Sometimes it's okay to say that the emperor's not wearing any clothes. It doesn't necessarily go down so well, but that's what being a journalist is all about. Having your own beliefs and being able to articulate them in the right way.
That's what I love about the whole thing. I think we have to recognize the insignificance of our own opinions. I think for me, that's really, really important. And you see lots who have no conception of that whatsoever. I think that's so important, to recognize the insignificance of our own opinions. But it's also really important for me anyway, to be able to think for yourself and to have your own opinions. And one of the reasons I love doing this podcast is it gives me a chance to get out of football and rant about other things, which I'll probably do at great tiresome length. And just the capacity to make a living doing this. No, being able to express ourselves to our full capabilities and not even most of the time end up in correctional facilities. What a privilege that is.
I saw that one coming. I was thinking he's not going to do a Dr. Dre in NWA, but he had to go there. He just couldn't resist it.
I can resist everything apart from temptation.
Yeah, that's true. That's right. Full up of quotes today. We're going to take you out of your comfort zone today, if that's all right, Darren, because the point of this podcast is to talk about a memorable game of football from any time in history. We've gone as far back as the 1940s, and we may go further back, but obviously the further back you go, the less information or practical information you can rely on. So we're not going to go that far back today. So we try and look at a memorable game through the prism of what was going on in society at the time. So that includes the music scene at the time, the politics and so on, to see if it can inform us as to why the games are so shit, in Tim's words. However, that was his words, Darren, not my words. I'm just quoting the legend Dino.
Well, this one today's wasn't shit, was it?
I was about to say that. Yeah, I was about to make you eat your words. Well, you weren't talking about this in any case, but Liverpool versus Newcastle United, they met many times, but this game on the 3rd of April, 1996, seems to be, by all accounts, the greatest meeting of these two clubs. Why was that, first of all, Tim, do you reckon?
Well, I'm going to pass the ball on to Darren very quickly, because I was a little bit otherwise engaged at this time. I'll be interested to find out where Darren was. When I saw it 3rd of April, 1996, I knew instantly it was a Wednesday. Instantly.
Why was that?
Because the 1st of April, ludicrously enough, the 1st of April 1996 was my first date with her indoors. It was the very first date. And it was, I thought that I'd be coming back for good the next month. I was due back in England in about 4 or 5 weeks' time. I did come back. And I thought that was it for Brazil. I thought that was it. I thought I had a job lined up in England. I found out just afterwards that job had fallen through. I didn't have any job, so I ended up coming back to Brazil. One of the reasons I ended up coming back to Brazil was I'd met her indoors, and because I thought I was leaving, I could let my guard down, and I thought, well, let's have one last, let's have another little fling, while I'm here, last few weeks, and it ended up being, yeah, and paying for her kids. I've just paid one.
Don't bring that in it.
She's 32 and I've just paid her college fees today, for crying out loud. Let me get it out of my system.
You're trying to redeem yourself.
It's a pleasure.
Because you went to Brazil and you thought, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, I'm going to go back home. You couldn't get a job. Then you go back to Brazil. You take your mind off the game, crucially, Darren. You see what happens when you take your mind off the game. As a sports journalist, you've got to concentrate on the game, don't you? You can't allow for distractions. But I bet you've had one or two, but feel free to explain.
Well, me?
Yeah.
I want to hear about Tim.
We all want to hear about
him. It is a decisive moment in my life, because as a result of that job falling through, and as a result of meeting her indoors, it's then, because my visa complicated situation a little bit complicated. How long can I get back in on a tourist visa? It's the decisive moment. So I go back in kind of August of '96, and right, it's now or never. Right, I'm going to be with this woman, but I've got a year now to get something sorted out. And if it doesn't happen, then it's all over. I won't be able to stay. So it's apps, and then suddenly, just by chance, the doors of paradise opened for me during the course of '97, and I ended up, conning people that I could make a living doing this, and I've been living that ever since. So it's a big moment in my life. So you'll forgive me if I don't remember the game itself.
Well, you see,
with a lot of details.
You see, this is the problem. It was a cracking game, by the way, Tim. Yeah, should we tell you about it? Darren, do you want to tell him about it?
Well, first of all, I'll just tell you a little bit about around it, and also the difficulty of the game itself, because one of the things when I look back at it, certainly now being a print journalist for a national, is very similar to when Manchester United beat Bayern Munich in the Champions League final in 1999. And lots of people watching at home regard it as one of the greatest, most epic nights of football. Certainly Champions League football over the last few decades. But I would imagine lots of print journalists regard it as one of the most frustrating nights for years, because, of course, we have deadlines. And by the time if it's 1-0 and it's in the 80th minute, you're relatively confident that they're going to see it out. So you press the button and it goes to your office, and then they start putting headlines together, and they start laying it out on the page. And then if it's 1-1, you can tweak it a bit, can't you? But you can still, it's still easier to control. When the game gets turned on its head as spectacularly as it was in the last, few minutes, what was it, injury time, if I remember rightly, you just basically throw your laptop out off the stand, because there's not really much you can do after that. So it's the first thing you think about that with dramatic late goal and everything is, I wonder what the journalists covering the game must have thought. And fortunately, I wasn't one of those journalists on that night, so I can remember it quite, not vividly. I like you, Tim. I wouldn't say I could remember it vividly, but I can remember the pattern of the game and the build up to it as well, because Newcastle, they'd been doing so well that season. And certainly in the first half of the season, I think by midway they were 10 points clear, and they were doing fantastic. And then they just stopped to nothing over the course of the subsequent 2 months to the game. The previous 2 months to the game. They signed Faustino Asprilla in January, if I remember rightly. I think it was £16.9 million, and I'm sure you might correct me on that, Tim. But I remember them signing him and being really excited about what he could do, because I've seen him play, and he just looked to be that touch of class that might give them that renewed impetus during the second half of the season. But it just didn't work. And by contrast, Liverpool, I think they'd won 6 out of 9 going into the match, and they were in better form. But it still looked a good opportunity for Newcastle to maybe, go toe to toe with them at the very least, and maybe get the kickstart that their title bid needed. But obviously, it all fell so spectacularly apart. And I think one of the songs that were around, two of the songs that are around at the moment that come to mind when I think about this, because Mark, our producer, says that I have to remember a couple of the songs that were around at the time. So one of them was "Return of the Mac" by Mark. Goodness me, I can't remember.
Mark Morrison.
Morrison, thank you.
Yeah.
Mark Morrison. And the other was Firestarter by the Prodigy. And
Number one.
The Prodigy, number one, exactly. And the funny thing is, if one of these hotshot producers were putting together a montage of, or closer for one of these shows, they probably would use, that would be such appropriate music for that game, because it was just the build up, the game, the action, the drama, the climax, all of it was just, as the kids say, flames. Probably the kids don't even say that anymore. So
I did some radio with Peter Beardsley a few years ago, and we were talking about Asprilla, because he got some flack, when Newcastle tailed off. And Beardsley said, no, Asprilla was fantastic in almost all of the games he played. But I wonder, I know who Asprilla blames, because he was talking about this on Argentine TV quite recently. Pavel Cernicek, the goalkeeper, is not on Asprilla's Christmas card list. He said, he told Argentine TV, he said the goalkeepers were terrible. We'd score 7 and concede 8. They'd always been finding new ways to throw the ball in the back of the net. But I wonder, because you look at the lineup, this is at Anfield. You've got Ferdinand and Asprilla, Ginola and Beardsley.
Yeah.
And
goals and creativity.
And you got Lee there as well, Robert Lee as a kind of mixed midfielder. So I wonder whether the signing of Asprilla was necessary, and whether it just unbalanced the side.
Yeah, I would agree with that, actually. I mean, I think knowing English football and knowing Newcastle, it was just one of those deals that presented itself cheaply, relatively, and they felt we could get this A-list star here. He's something different. We would never normally be able to get him. Maybe let's get that deal done. I don't know, and you would be able to tell me more about that, Tim, in terms of how he came to be at Newcastle. But I agree with you. It was not a signing I think they needed to make. I think they needed to keep their heads together and maybe just continue on the route that they were going. Effectively, in games, they were shooting their way out of trouble because they weren't that great defensively. And obviously, that all came to a spectacular climax at Anfield.
Well, having said that, Asprilla scores a decent goal in this match.
Lays one on as well.
Yeah. A really good one, actually. A really good one. And also, this is for both of you. When Asprilla talks about how many goals they were leaking, you've hinted at it already. Shouldn't one be blaming Kevin Keegan, the coach at the time? That was he famously said, did he not? However many goals they score, we'll always score one more than them. And so he wasn't that concerned about the defence. He was.
Well, the thing is, the interesting thing about that is that he was actually chosen as England manager on that basis, because everybody loved the adrenaline rush they got from watching his teams. And it was a very English thing that people would rather, because obviously that was a few years after George Graham and his 1-0 to the Arsenal, that Arsene Wenger came in, and obviously Bruce Rioch and then Arsene Wenger, but it came in and introduced this seductive, attractive football that people preferred quite considerably, and they weren't interested in grinding out games by a goal to nil and the end justifying the means. They wanted to see attractive, entertaining football on the basis that we are in an entertainment business, and there is a separate debate to be had as far as that's concerned. But Keegan got the England job on that basis, and obviously, as you know, it ended in ignominy, and he ended up resigning in the toilets and being persuaded to stay, and then now saying, I've got to go.
And confessing that he wasn't up to the job, which
yes.
I admire that.
I don't admire that at all.
Don't you?
Right. There's a great story before you answer, Dustin. There's a terrific story about a broadcaster I probably better not name, but he's doing a show at the time, 606, and he after the game, obviously it's against Germany, and we played poorly and beaten, and he says, it's a terrible result. Keegan, he's got to go. He's got to go. If you want him to go, call up, and he puts out the number, and then it comes through 20 minutes later. Actually, Keegan has gone. He has resigned. And he said, he's spineless.
I'm so glad you told me to wait before I answered.
It's one of my favourite stories.
That's brilliant.
And I personally would never have called for Keegan or anybody to go in that way. That I think is disrespectful. But what I would say, Tim, is it's all right to say I'm not up to the job, but you had the job and you need to bring other people in. That's all that means. You know, you are the CEO, if you like, of the club, and not every CEO is up to the job. Not every prime minister's up to the job. Not every president's up to the job, but it's who you bring in around you to ensure that the job is done. And it's not that he's a bad manager. I'm just pointing out in the game that you have today, it's insufficient to score one more than they score. What you've got to do is lock up your defence.
Well, see, my vision of Keegan, he was so influenced by Bill Shankly. And that's what he wanted to be. He wanted to be that rousing, emotional. But Shankly had Bob Paisley. And once Shankly resigned at Liverpool, Bob Paisley, who just looked like the old uncle in his carpet slippers, we kind of found out that Bob Paisley was, if Shankly was the emotion of the operation, Bob Paisley was the brains. And maybe he didn't have a Bob Paisley. And maybe he didn't have someone working with him just to balance him out a little bit. And he went full gung-ho on the emotion. And maybe that's one of the reasons he was so attracted to the idea of having Asprilla when he became available. Because I mean, even like the centre-back, great centre-back, Albert, you know, the Belgian, even he's charging forward. You know, it's not a side that's built for defence.
But there are games, for example, where I remember they smashed Manchester United one year 5-1. And Philippe Albert was rampaging forward and scoring goals. And that was obviously the way Keegan liked to play. And I'd maybe defer to you, Tim, in so much as I think Keegan, bringing him in was making him England manager was a classic case of bringing in somebody with attacking instincts and expecting him to play a different type of game. Because international football is a very tactical kind of game. You know, you look at some of the Latin teams, and you know, who are free scoring, and the individual players have got creativity and have got goals in them. But to win matches, you have to find a formula that is built on defence. Nobody wins things without a sound defence. And Keegan never really focused that much on defence. He focused on the beauty of the game, the seductiveness of the game, goals. He wanted people to have fun. And I think around that time, Ruud Gullit was at Chelsea promising sexy football as well. And it may have been a couple of years later or between Keegan's time at Newcastle and the England job. So forgive me if I've got the chronology wrong, but I think it's a separate debate as to whether football is about the ends justifying the means, which I actually do believe, or whether football is about paying for your ticket and enjoying the ride regardless of what the score happens to be for your team.
Yeah, one of my strongest memories of football, one of my favourite memories of football, I got a mate who was a Palace fan. So I was that 1990 FA Cup semi-final when Palace beat Liverpool 4-3. It's an incredible game. It was an incredible game.
Right.
And after the game, walking outside around the stadium, and there's this Liverpool fan on his own, head down, trudging sadly, and he hears our accents, and he looks up and he says to us, "Cracking game, lads." And it was, you know. So I hope that those Newcastle fans who've made the trip to Anfield, or they're watching on the TV, I hope that at the end, at the final whistle, even though they lost, I hope that there were people in the Newcastle fans thinking, yeah, it was a cracking game.
Yeah.
You know what you've just done, Tim? You've just given away the ending, and we haven't talked about the game yet. Typical.
If anyone doesn't know the result of this game, you know, it was only 25 years ago.
Allow them to enjoy the
breaking news. Breaking news.
Yes.
24 years later.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. Apologies. I was going to say before we talk about the game itself, though. Do you remember, either of you, the context? Well, Tim won't because he's in Brazil doing the Loca or whatever it is they call it. But maybe you, Darren, the context, the social context, social and political context of the time. There was a beef scandal, of course, and we'd slaughtered a lot of cattle.
Mad cow disease, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was BSE.
Yeah, BSE, yes. Yeah, mad cow disease.
Yeah, well, yeah. I try and talk like the scientist on this podcast. On the other one, I'll talk like the riffraff. Don't worry. Mad cow disease. I feel sorry for the cows, mate. You know, it's like we're not mad. You poisoned us. It's you lot.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, that's what the cows would say. By the way, I don't want to be taken off Twitter or Facebook like President Trump, although they have mistaken me for the president before, I'm sure. It was kind of like a difficult time politically all around this match. John Major was prime minister and he was going off to the European Union looking for a deal, the kind of deal that Margaret Thatcher had got at, Maastricht deal kind of thing. He was like looking for his version of that. And he's only got another year before his entire government unravels at the polls and a whole generation of Thatcher era politicians are literally axed at the ankles, never more to be seen on the political scene. Did you remember that time?
Replaced by another era of Thatcher era politicians like Tony Blair, but that's another one.
I have no opinions.
I have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, I have no opinions.
Well, the most interesting thing for me was that in those years, I was a local paper journalist, and when I started in journalism, I was in 1995. I was a news journalist. So in those years, it was my first real experience at the coalface of politicians making promises that they didn't keep. Because I worked in North London, and I remember, ironically enough, a Labour politician promising to keep a hospital near where my offices were, the local hospital, open, and then completely breaking that promise eventually. And obviously, when the night, the time period when it all started to unravel for the government, it was fascinating and instructive for me at the same time, because as a news journalist, you're seeing all of this, what's the word I'm looking for? It's historic, really, isn't it? It's probably a too cheap a word to use, but it's quite historic. But you're not watching it as a spectator anymore. You're watching it as a journalist, and there's a different context.
The reason why this, the context and the politics and everything like that is kind of instructive in this match's conversation is that when I say that the old guard were exiting the door of Westminster, what we kind of see in this match, the last of the old guard of Liverpool, at least, exiting the door, and a younger generation holding fort in a quite dynamic way.
Well, listen, if you look at the area, the players, you look at Fowler, one of the goal scorers in the match, and he had a very strong social conscience. I remember there was big fury over his support for the Dockers. After he'd scored a goal, he lifted up his T-shirt and he had a big message. expressing his support, and the TV cameras cut away from it. I think a couple of the newspapers showed it the following day, but there was outrage because how dare he show support for people who were worried about their jobs. And and traditionally Liverpool have always been a club, and the city has been one with a very strong social conscience that had been ravaged really by the policies of the Tory government. And some of those individuals with that affinity to the club, with that affinity to the city, as you rightly say, were exiting stage left, and that new guard were coming in.
Isn't it interesting that Liverpool last year's election didn't go the way of so many other northern cities? It didn't go to the right. And my explanation for this is that, the right really played the nationalist old empire card, some of the things that Lawrence Fox is trying to go now, and that kind of stuff just doesn't wash in Liverpool, because it's a city with such an Irishness about it. So the stuff about the greatness of the English Empire, if there's one place that ain't going to watch, it's Liverpool. Yeah.
I saw there's a wonderful, if that's the right word, video of I think Farage, but certainly a couple of his acolytes in Merseyside, walking the streets trying to garner support, and people are literally chasing them away and saying, "We don't want you around here, get stuffed." And one of them ends up having to hide up a tree and waiting for a police officer to come and protect him and take him away, because the mob have just gathered for him and they want to tear him limb from limb. And you're right, there has always been a very strong, like I say, conscience.
It's radical. Liverpool's just radical.
A republic.
Yeah, and you get the sense when you go to Liverpool that it's real, that people there have experienced life in a way that has formed them in the way they are. And they say of Jurgen Klopp coming over from Germany that Liverpool was the right fit for him, because Dortmund were the sort of Liverpool of Germany, kind of in terms of working class roots and stuff like that. And I can see that. And does it reflect itself on the football? Let's talk about this game on the 3rd of April 1996. So Liverpool meet Newcastle at Anfield, and Liverpool are chasing the title. I think are they in 4th position at this point? I can't remember, but they're certainly in the top 4, chasing the title. And so are Newcastle, arguably. They've had a decent couple of seasons. So both teams are coming into this match, I would have thought, expecting to win it.
Needing to win it. In order to challenge United for the title. Newcastle, as Darren said, they were 10 points clear, and then that's been eaten up. So they need the win. Liverpool need the win. They're both chasing United. The thing with you mentioned Liverpool being radical. The thing that was really radical about this Liverpool side was their suits. I was back for the FA Cup final, and it was all the Spice Boys stuff and those garish cream suits. And one thing I think we can conclude about, I thought they were terrible, frankly, with good players. But they played 3 centre-backs. It was a 3 centre-back formation with Rob Jones at left wing-back, a defensive right-back at left wing-back. Now, I remember watching the FA Cup final. Now, I remember I'd been in Brazil for 2 years, where attacking fullbacks were gods. It was the high point of Cafu and Roberto Carlos, and there were lots more. And I knew enough to know that the point of having 3 centre-backs is that you can really throw your wing-backs forward. That gives them full licence to bomb forward. And here Liverpool are with a right-footed defensive fullback at left wing back. Didn't make any sense at all. And one of the things I think you take from this game is the coaches just weren't up to it. This is one game that explains why so many foreign coaches have come in subsequently.
Yeah, and what's also interesting about Liverpool as well, it was 6 years since they'd won the title, and they could never have dreamed it would end up being 2 decades. Because of the quality that they'd had at the club previously. And these days, people look back and they tried everything. They had one manager at one stage, obviously they had two, Roy Evans and Gerard Houllier. And it's interesting you say about the coaches and why the foreign coaches came in subsequently, well, not straight away, but in the years, subsequent 4 or 5 years. Because one of the enduring images from the match itself is a sight of Keegan slumped over the advertising hoarding at the end. No one ever forgets that. Sorry, but if I'm giving the game away, doesn't.
Well, no, we're actually talking about it now. So you go ahead.
Well, of course, that Wenger would come in at Arsenal, for example, a couple of years later, and he would show with a few refinements that it was possible to ally defensive stability with creative flair. Ericsson would come in for England a few years after that. It was 2001, 2000, after Howard Kendall.
Was that a successful tenure in your view?
Well, it's not about the tenure; it's what he did subsequently. Because you could say he was a quarter-final manager and his compensation king, but the fact was that he got the country feeling better about the national team for a period. 5-1, even Heskey scored. Although I think that was tremendously disrespectful. Heskey did a tremendous job for the national team, but the point I'm trying to make is that we talk about the defensive stability that teams needed to at least compete with the better sides, and Newcastle didn't have that, which is why their title bid fell to pieces. Liverpool didn't have that, which is why they simply couldn't retain the consistency to win a league, but they were able to win League Cups, UEFA Cups, and FA Cups as they did in 2001. But Arsenal did, because Wenger came in and Wenger was able to get them consistent at the back, prolong the careers of the older players, and source Europe for exciting young talent cheaply. And he didn't even have to go that far, because nobody knew about Patrick Vieira and Emmanuel Petit, and he bought them in for less than the price of a McDonald's Happy Meal. So I think, I totally buy into Tim's point about why it ended up, for a period at least, the case being the case that foreign coaches came into English football, and once a few were successful, the door was open to many more.
Yeah. So okay, let's talk about this match. So they go out and some real sort of iconic names of football on both sides of the pitch. You've already mentioned Asprilla, Les Ferdinand. Was it Serdacek in goal?
That's right.
Well?
Yep.
Yeah, for Newcastle.
Correct.
Shot stopper at least there, and some other big names as well that we'll come on to in a moment or two. And Liverpool, like I say, Ian Rush plays something of a cameo in it.
He does, yeah. He's off the bench.
Off the bench, and this is like I say, towards the sunset of his career, really. And clearly, Liverpool have got great replacements for him in both Dan Collymore, who was amazing in this match. And you wonder, sadly, you think, why couldn't you have been like that? Why couldn't you just stabilise? I know he had serious issues, mental health issues and so on, that we didn't know about a lot of the time. But you just wish he had been able to keep this kind of form throughout his time. And Robbie Fowler, peerless in terms of goals. This is the thing, though, Darren, even though you say that, maybe, was it you or was it Tim said that the both teams were not brilliant. This wasn't a brilliant sort of match.
Brilliant players. No,
right. I was going to say brilliant goals as well. I think that's what makes this game particularly memorable. I think every single goal is a brilliant goal. It's like one after the other. So to get past the defenders, you had to score with something special.
Yes and no. Yes, and I mean, I agree that the goals did need a lot of quality, but the one that's most striking, everybody knows, is that last goal. And even if the commentary obviously abroad would have been different, so all of us may have heard different commentary, but I know when Collymore, who went on to do his own radio show, began broadcasting his. He'd always play a jingle, bars, Rush, Barnes, Collymore closing in, and then he scores. And the 1-2 that the two play, it's just so easy to play that 1-2 through the Newcastle defence. And then Collymore gets, who's tracking him on the right side? And that sounds so churlish when you're talking about one of the most entertaining, epic games in Premier League history, you could argue. But you do wonder who's tracking him because he just ain't able to steal in from the right and score. So, I think both those sides are fantastic. They just needed tweaks at the back. And had they had that defensive stability, who knows what they could have done.
Tim?
No, it works for me. And how can you have no one in the right back position? I understand that it was an excellent exchange of passes, Barnes and Rush, and they've sucked in the defence and created the space. But still, you wanna have your defensive line at least defending, the penalty area, at least defending that. But that's the way certainly that Newcastle was set up. They were set up to attack, weren't they? They weren't set up to defend.
Tim, can I ask, can you think of any other examples of managers who play a certain way and then are appointed to jobs where they are asked to set up against their instincts, if you want?
Well, and it happens all the time in South American football because coaches get sacked so quickly. So there's very little project to the clubs. All right, with this fella who's a bit attacking, he's just got sacked, so we'll bring in someone else to do something completely different, and then we'll bring in someone else 2 months later who'll do something completely different. The running of football is often so amateur that long-term projects, and there's no collective project. The project is quite often the individual career of the coach, and not the collective project of the team. The way that football is run is so amateur, and that's one of the reasons why South American football has lost the global market to European football. European football, for all its weaknesses, and there are lots of problems and weaknesses, and you all know much more about this than I do, but the fact that agents can get paid from multiple sources is a scandal. Now, agents should represent players and get paid from players, full stop. And the fact that they can get paid from other sources, it's just insane. But even with those weaknesses, there is still more of a strategic vision about European football than there is about South American football, especially the part that your opponent is a business partner.
Yes.
And here it's a lot of, your opponent is your mortal enemy. He's never a bit. So you never want anything good for your opponents.
Yeah.
So it's all about me and not about us. And European football has much more the idea that it's about us. It's about us as business partners growing our industry together.
It's a good question that you asked, though, Darren. I've never thought of it like that. A manager being asked to play against their instinct. But do players not always get asked, or nearly always get asked to play against their instinct?
Yeah, but when players are asked to do that, they don't enjoy their football. And there are lots of examples of that. I mean, if you look at, we talk about the national team and the fact that when you watch England, and I would imagine any national team, what you want as a collective experience is to have a good night and to enjoy yourself and hopefully get the win as well. Not hopefully, you expect the win as well. You expect to win well. It's almost like the impossible dream that you want, because very often players come together, they don't have much time to gel, and then they're asked to go out and knock our socks on. And I look at Capello, who was appointed England manager. A lot of the players hated playing for him because he was a defensively minded coach. He'd had a stellar career, of course, and you look at his CV and it was outstanding, and they paid big money for him. And when he came in, everyone thought this is going to be it. But he was regimented, he was rigid, he was inflexible. He treated the players like kids, and the players hated it. They're all very open about the fact that the England camp was like an army camp. And very often players were asked to go against their instincts. And I remember there was a goalless draw Oh goodness, I can't remember who it was against. I think it was against Algeria at the World Cup in 2010 in South Africa. Was it Algeria? I can't remember. Anyway, it was one of the worst games of football at any level I'd ever seen. And the players just did not enjoy what they were being asked to do. So to answer your question, no, I don't think that players would. I mean, clearly there are cases where players are able to do a job, but by and large, I don't think they necessarily enjoy it. And generally, you can tell when you're reporting on a game, and all of us have reported on games, you know, when you're watching players who are not enjoying what they're doing, because you can see it in the way that they play, you can see it in the way that they perform, you can see it in their application, you can see it in the result, you can see it by
you can see it in the result. Are you sure about that? You can still win stuff playing against your instinct, though.
You probably can. You probably can, but yeah, you can. You can. Not you probably. I'm being churlish there. You can, but what you're asking me and what I'm saying is, I don't think. Well, I know players don't enjoy playing, you know, out of position or being asked to do jobs that they're unfamiliar with. Most players want to be able to express themselves in the way that they know best.
Tim, you reckon?
Yeah, they enjoy the win bonuses. So, if they can be persuaded that following this method will lead to win bonuses, they'll do it. They'll do it.
Yeah,
you reckon they're motivated by that? Do you really reckon that?
I
Just
agree.
winding up. You reckon they're motivated by what? What is the win bonus? What percentage of £1 million salary is a win bonus?
Well, winning just makes everything easier. It makes everything easier in the street. You know, it makes everything easier on social media. It's winning is a fabulous cure for all problems they might be going through. And you know, Newcastle, it's a wonderful game. It's a wonderful game. But imagine if there was social media going on in 1996, what some of those players would have had to put up with afterwards because they'd lost.
Well, it would have been Les Ferdinand who would have had to put up with the most stick, I'd have thought, because he had an opportunity, golden opportunity, only comes once in a match. He had a golden opportunity to at least tie the match. How did he miss?
Yeah, but you could say that about, you know, that Euro 1996, right? It's the golden goal, and the ball's going across the 6-yard box, and it's Gaza, isn't it, who reaches out and he's agonizingly close but just can't stab the ball into what is an open goal. It happens all the time. So I would not reproach Les Ferdinand for that. It happens.
Football's hard, you know. It's really hard. I remember being at Chelsea once a few years ago, and they did this fabulous thing at half time where they brought some fans on and they reproduced on the scoreboard a pass from the game, like a 50-yard diagonal ball. All right, that's what William has just done. Now you do it to the supporters. And could they do it? No, not I hope. And that was it was really good. I thought that was a lesson that they were trying to teach to the fans. You know, look how hard football is.
We're talking about footballers from 24 years ago now. Essentially, do you think players like Sterling, Sancho, Ronaldo are motivated solely by winning or by being the best players that they can be, the best players in the world, if you like?
Well, if you look at
for those
Ronaldo, Dotun, Ronaldo has said, isn't he, that he wants his legacy to be that he's the greatest goal scorer of all time. And with his goal record, he's closing in on that. But I think he's already left a legacy because his appetite, his dedication, the way he trains, if you look at the fact that he is younger than Rooney, if I'm not mistaken, and yet you look at where Rooney is and you look at where Ronaldo is, that tells you everything about his commitment to his craft and the way that he goes about his business. And I think that as a footballer, he is already an icon. It's obvious to say because everybody knows it, but he isn't somebody who rests on his laurels. So I don't think, no, I'll rephrase that. Everybody's motivated at some level by money because everybody has to pay the bills. But
I wasn't thinking by money. Sorry, Darren, I wasn't thinking so much by money, but more by either winning, as in winning a game for themselves or for the team, and winning to be the best player in the world. You know, which is it that motivates the really, really top players nowadays?
So it's a lovely question, isn't it? Because it's one of the great contradictions of football, the contradiction between collective glory and individual glory.
Indeed.
Ronaldo is clearly one of the most individually motivated, and he wants those individual prizes. They're a vindication for him of everything that he's been through in his life, those individual prizes. Messi seems less concerned about those. He sees those as consequences for a job well done in a collective context. But at the end of the day, in order to pick up those prizes, you've got to be in successful sides. So I think at the end of the day, you want to win. You want to be important in your team, which is winning.
Which is what Return of the Mac by Mark Morrison was about. You know, it's in the charts on this weekend of the 3rd of April 1996. It's number 4 in the charts. I've already mentioned Firestarter Prodigy, excellent soundtrack for what was something of a firestarter, firecracking game between Liverpool and Newcastle. We don't need to talk about the X-Files in the charts at number 2.
I never watched.
I never seen it. Me neither.
Didn't miss anything.
High five, Tim.
You didn't miss anything at all. Number 5 in the charts, Gabrielle, she with the eye patch, if you remember.
Great song, isn't it? It's got a kind of Dusty Springfield feel about it.
Yeah,
it's a lovely, terrific ballad, lovely song.
Great singer, put together by a sort of musical collective that were based in Brixton at the time. I remember one of the people that founded her and was behind her was a guy called Johnny Laws, you know, something of a maverick dreadlocks guy. But, you know, they seem to have gotten it together. It's like a football team. Sometimes with pop artists, you know, the people around them can either be conducive to their success or can distract from their success.
Were they not conducive? Were they not conducive in the case of Mark Morrison? That's a great song. I heard a busker in Rio sing that last year, and I was so happy. Because I love the song. As I said, I came back to England just a few weeks after this, and that song was still around. And I kind of adopted it. Every year when I've come back, it's been the return of the Vic. What happened to him?
It's a good question. Good question. I think he got involved in some kind of shenanigans. Now, had he just come out from doing a bid for having a weapon, as I recall, at some point? You know, he had done some time. You know, the kind of like pop star time. I'm not talking about time for really heinous activities, but nevertheless, he'd done some kind of pop star time, the kind of time that Mick Jagger's done. And then he came out of that and had the hit because he came from a boy band originally. Do you remember that?
Is that right?
Yeah, I seem to remember that he was originally from a boy band. He came from Nottingham or somewhere like that. Born in Germany, in West Germany.
Wow. I never knew any of this.
And he was originally from Barbados, or at least, you know, ancestrally from Barbados. So at that moment, at that time, Barbados had Nigel Benn in the ring and Mark Morrison in the charts at number 4. So I don't want to diss, you know, anybody from Barbados, but this was a remarkable time for Barbados. I'm sure there are many more. For British Barbados, I'm sure there are many more remarkable times along the way.
British Bajans.
I'm sorry?
What's the word? Bajan?
Bajan.
Right.
Bajan, yeah. Somebody from Barbados is described as a Bajan. And of course, just the other day, as much as they loved being part of the United Kingdom and Commonwealth, they're now looking to get rid of the Queen as head of state. She's head of state, even though they're an independent country. So they announced the other day they get rid of the Queen sometime next year. I think they want to do it, which is a little bit of a. Oh, you know about this as well, do you, Darren?
Yep, I do. Yeah. It's about 3 or 4 weeks old now, isn't it?
It is indeed. No, I just wondered when I asked if you knew about it. I thought you were completely consigned to the back pages of the paper rather than the front pages of the paper. No, sometimes it's always impressive when the back pages make it onto the front pages. Though I have to tip my hat to whichever journalist and the players or the supporters. Sorry, the athletes that have made that possible, but.
We don't spend our entire lives in a toy shop, do we?
Quite.
How many times have you been on the front page, Vickery?
When I've turned it round, I think.
Yeah, upside down. So quite an interesting time in the music charts, I'd have thought.
It's a good chart, isn't it? I was surprised when and seeing some of the things just outside the top 10. On the far side had a hit. I didn't know the Far Side had a hit. Running.
Yeah.
I remember seeing
they did. Of course they did.
I remember seeing them a few years earlier, way down on the bill, and they just had this single out called Your Mama. And it had one of the greatest lines I've ever heard. Your mama's got a glass eye with a fish in it.
That's a good line.
That's a great line, isn't it? There's Not Gonna Cry, Mary J. Blige. Every time we look at a chart, there's always a great Mary J. Blige thing. Missing from Everything But the Girl, showing the interesting direction they're